We're just locked in this escalating conflict over, well, everything. Trade, tech, global influence. But then, in late 2025, something totally unexpected happened. A truce. So today we're going to break down that high-stakes meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping that put the economic war on pause. And right off the bat, you can see the difference in tone, can't you? You've got President Trump with his classic style, calling it an amazing meeting. And then you have President Xi, much more reserved, saying it was a good start. This contrast really gets to the heart of the matter. Was this a real breakthrough, or was it just kicking the can down the road for a year?
Okay, so to really get why this 2025 truce is such a big deal, we need to zoom out a bit. This meeting didn't just happen out of nowhere. It's actually the latest chapter in a long, complicated, 70-year saga of hostility, cooperation, and intense competition between these two superpowers.
This timeline, man, it really shows you the whiplash in this relationship, right? You go from decades of basically giving each other the silent treatment to this historic opening in the 70s. Then comes this massive economic integration, which eventually turned sour. That leads us to the first big tariff wars under Trump, which then morphs into a tech-focused fight under Biden, and now, here we are, with this fragile truce. Each one of these steps set the stage for the next.
So what's driving all these wild swings? Well, it all comes down to this fundamental paradox. On one hand, their economies are just so deeply tangled up together. U.S. companies rely on Chinese factories. China needs U.S. tech and consumers. Pulling them apart is incredibly painful for everyone. But on the other hand, they're locked in this fierce competition for global leadership, and they're using economic tools as weapons in that fight.
And you can see this competition playing out with totally different strategies. The first Trump administration, they went in with a blunt instrument, tariffs. Just slap taxes on physical goods to try and fix the trade deficit. The Biden administration, though, took a much more surgical approach, focusing on technology, specifically blocking the export of advanced computer chips to slow down China's progress in things like AI. Two very different playbooks, but the same underlying game.
And the scale of this conflict has been absolutely massive. At its peak, the first trade war saw the U.S. hit over $360 billion worth of Chinese goods with tariffs. This wasn't some minor skirmish, it was an economic shockwave that sent ripples through global supply chains and created huge uncertainty for businesses all over the world. Which brings us to October 2025, in Busan, South Korea. After months of tensions flaring up again following Trump's return to the White House, the two leaders finally agreed to meet face-to-face for the first time in 6 years. There wasn't a lot of spectacle. This was all about business. So they meet for 80 minutes, which honestly is longer than many expected. And the setting, it was this stark, secured airport facility. The vibe was all about urgency. Both sides knew that another full-blown trade war could absolutely destabilize an already fragile global economy. The goal was to find an off-ramp and find it quick.
So what actually came out of those 80 minutes? It wasn't some grand formal treaty. Instead, the deal was really built on 4 key pillars, with each side making a pretty significant concession to cool things down.
All right, let's break this down. China's big give was hitting pause for 1 year on any new export controls for rare earths. And that's a huge deal for U.S. tech and defense. In return, the U.S. offered some tariff relief, especially on penalties tied to the fentanyl crisis. Then you have the other pieces. China committed to buying a ton of American farm goods. And maybe the most crucial part for the future, they agreed to get back to the table and talk about those advanced AI chips. And if you want to understand the political side of that agriculture deal, just look at this number. 12 million tons. That's how many U.S. soybeans China agreed to buy, like right away, with promises for even more. For American farmers in the Midwest, a key political group hit hard by the earlier trade war, this was a massive, massive sigh of relief. Now, to really get why China's move on rare earths was such a game changer, you have to know what these things even are. These aren't just some obscure metals. They are literally the lifeblood of our modern world. They're in your smartphone, in electric vehicles, and advanced fighter jets. Since China dominates the supply, them pausing any threats to cut off exports was a huge step back from the brink.
So this deal wasn't just about Washington and Beijing. The whole world was basically holding its breath. So how did international markets and U.S. allies react when the news finally dropped? The initial reaction was overwhelmingly positive. You can see it right here. The markets just shot up. The Dow and the S&P 500 both jumped, and look at soybean futures, a big surge there. Investors absolutely hate uncertainty, And this truce, even if it was temporary, gave them a dose of predictability they'd been desperate for.
And this quote here from the U.S.-China Business Council just nails the feeling in the business world. For years, they'd been living with this constant anxiety, not knowing when the next tariff threat would drop. This truce, even for just a year, was like finally being able to take a breath.
But, and this is a really big but, let's be clear, across the board the consensus is the same. This is a pause, not a peace treaty. Chinese analysts are calling it a framework for engagement. Allies are relieved but still very nervous. Why? Because all the really thorny issues, technology leadership, Taiwan, industrial policy, none of that got solved. It's all still sitting there, waiting.
So, with this one-year clock officially ticking, the big question is, what happens next? What does the future hold when this temporary truce runs out?
It's so important to be crystal clear about what this agreement actually is and what it isn't. What it is a tactical timeout. It's a pause on new restrictions. It's a chance to talk. What it is not is a final settlement. It doesn't end the tech rivalry, and it for sure doesn't resolve the deep structural conflicts that got us here. Basically, it buys time. That's it. It doesn't build trust.
Analysts are already trying to figure out what comes next, and this table really lays out the possibilities. The most likely scenario, the baseline forecast, has a 50% probability. We get a year of relative calm, and then the old fights flare right back up over all those unresolved issues. So while there's a chance for something better, a complete collapse back into a trade war is still very much on the table.
And that really brings us to the final multi-trillion-dollar question. Both leaders got what they needed in the short term from this deal, but did they actually lay the groundwork for a more stable relationship? Or did they just hit the pause button on a conflict that's bound to return, maybe even bigger and more intense than before? The answer to that? Well, it's going to shape the entire global economy for years to come.